before we went into the chicken coop, we had to clear it with a flashbang. And of course, we just stirred up, I don't know how many feathers and pounds of chicken poo, and everything is in the air, and we're just choked out. And of course, we're just dying laughing because now we're just covered in filth. And as everything starts to calm down, my buddy looks at me and he's just like,
Welcome to Sunny Side Up Podcast, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
So, what made you want to go into the military?
Primarily the challenge. At the time, I was finishing up my first year of college, played Division III football, and I didn't feel like I had a straight direction, so to say, of what to study for the next 3 years. And the military seemed appealing to me for the challenge, the opportunity of travel, and specifically the Marine Corps kind of addressed both of those two things for me. And at the time, I didn't know any other Marines, so it seemed like a step in the right direction that no one else I knew had taken or was going. So I kind of wanted to go off on my own.
So, what made you choose the Marines then?
Primarily the history of one of the world's fiercest fighting force, and as a 19-year-old. Not really knowing a whole lot about the different branches and things like that. It was the toughest basic training, toughest boot camp. And at the time, that's exactly what I was looking for. And that's what I got.
Okay. So you're 19?
I enlisted May 7th of 2001 on my 19th birthday.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking to your mom about that, and just like them coming over to the house and, signing the papers and all that.
Right.
So like, what was that day like when you signed? And then,
it all happened so fast. I went to a recruiting office, and according to them, after I finished basic training, I was able to go back and just say hi and shake their hands again and, thank them for the work that they had done on their end to get me into boot camp. But from May 7th, I started boot camp June 18th. So there wasn't a whole lot of time in between the two. So it all happened very fast. I didn't have a whole lot of time to reflect because there were some weight issues that I needed to address. I had put on some weight bulking up for the football team and things like that. So doing some pre-boot camp workouts with all the other poolies or the people that were about to, enlist themselves. So the workouts kept me busy, and it all seemed so surreal, and it just went very fast. But I just remember, obviously, there was a lot of apprehension, and it's very, you don't know what to expect. And obviously, at the time, this was all pre 9/11. So going into boot camp was a different type of mindset opposed to those who probably joined after 9/11.
Yeah. So like your first day of when you they take you on a bus, right?
Right.
Okay.
So we they take us from a bus. They had us at I was West Coast MCRD San Diego, and on the yellow footprints, on the yellow footsteps, and life got a lot different very quickly.
So like your first day, drill instructor comes on the bus. Like, what is that first day like?
It's just like they explain to you. The recruiters try to explain things to you about don't be first, don't be last. And there's a time for that, but it's not those first few days. You don't want to be noticed. You want to just try to get through those first few days. And that's before you're actually assigned to your full term of boot camp drill instructors. So these are guys that are just getting you into the in-processing of the Marine Corps, of boot camp. And what you show up with is what you have, and they strip that all from you, shave your head, and you're just another face and a number really at that point. And they break you down, and those first few days you realize that it's a quick process of breaking down, and it's a long process of building you back up into being a Marine.
So like you go to bed on the first night. What was going through your head?
the first few nights was definitely what was I thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to be the longest 3 months of my life. And from time to time, before you actually show up and start training, you think about things, but you don't actually know that real feeling until you're laying in your rack and you can hear some of the other people weeping a little bit, and people are questioning and just trying to reconsider things. But at that point, that ship has sailed and it's time to go. There's no turning back. So you have to, you just have to embrace it. And, you just have to be ready to get going every morning. And it's one of those things that a lot of times, no matter what you do, it's always wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to accept that and realize that what they're doing is for the better of yourself, for your platoon, and for the Marine Corps, for our country, ultimately.
Yeah. So June 20...
18th.
Okay, June 18th, you arrive. And then from that point, when is your first deployment?
My first deployment was, I forget the exact date. I want to say it was December of 2003. And it was very interesting. The war in Iraq had been going. And at that point, it was so to say, a lull in the war. The main invasion had already gone through Baghdad. And at that point, they were kind of letting the dust settle to see. They hadn't caught Saddam. They'd caught a couple of his sons. And we showed up in a rather slow point of the invasion of the war. And we were held off the coast of Kuwait and into Kuwait. And then we were doing anti-piracy missions, which are called VBSS, Visit, Board, Search, and Seizure. And it was a uncommon mission at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And the platoon that I was a part of and the rest of the forces, we were, that was our primary mission. So being able to do dozens upon dozens upon dozens of them, we were able to work out the standing operating procedures at the time for that mission, which was great. It was an honor to be part of such a rare mission, but to be able to do so many of them and be, in a way, we were kind of known as the VBSS deployment, and we were able to help the cause tremendously with stopping insurgents, trafficking, whether it was the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, and weapons and drugs they were using to support themselves on the war and terror.
Okay. So you went over there in 2003.
Correct.
What was it like after 9/11 happened? Because that was shortly after you started the Marines.
So my graduation date from boot camp was September 14th. And on 9/11, we were 3 days out from graduating boot camp. And the recruiters always told us right before you were about to graduate, your drill instructors are going to pull you all into the front, and they're going to say, this is it. This is your last chance. If this is something you really don't want to do, just raise your hand now, and you can go home. You don't have to do this. And they made it clear, do not raise your hand. It's their last attempt at getting you good, and they will get you. They'll take you out and smoke you. They'll put you in a sand pit, and they'll make your last few days a living hell.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very different. It was a different feel that morning. Everyone's in alphabetical order in the squad base, so from the drill instructor's duty hut, my rack was the very first one outside the door. And reveille was a little different that morning. They pulled us out a few minutes early because with the time change from the West Coast where I was to where the World Trade Center and the Pentagon was, things had happened earlier in the morning. And we stood on line, and our whitey tighties and our green t-shirts, and the drill instructors came out, walking up and down the squad bay, looking at us in the eyes, and they said, our country was attacked this morning. We are now at war, and that's why all of you are here. Do you understand me? And at that point, he had circled back around and he was standing, and we were eye to eye. And I'll never forget the look in his eye. And it was just happened to be, I was happened to be the guy that was standing there when he stopped and he said it. And we sound off, "Yes, sir." And he's like, no. We're at war. And that was a different feeling.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't this notion of this is a joke that they're trying to scare us or anything like that. We changed over into our uniforms for the day, marching to chow, and we passed the squad bay where any of the recruits who are injured during training have to sit until they can heal and then pick up where they left off with whichever platoon is coming through behind them. And they were sitting right hand, right knee, left hand, left knee, crisscross legs, looking up at a TV, and we could see the World Trade Center, the both buildings, the towers up in smoke. And that's when we knew for sure that life as we knew it and any idea of what we thought the Marine Corps was going to be for us was going to be different. And I don't think many of us ate a big breakfast that day. It was surreal.
Mm-hmm. So going, like, I know you said that you were in the ships, like, off of the coast of Kuwait, but, like, going, you get to Iraq, what was the first week like there?
It was very strange. To say that we weren't scared or apprehensive would be a lie. Everybody handles it a different way. The unit I was with was much different than the typical Marine infantry, so that was great. I was able to, I was inserted with recon platoon, and just being surrounded with the best Marines that the Marine Corps had to offer with great leadership was one of the most calming and satisfying factors, knowing that we can get through anything that they're going to throw at us. And the first few patrols, the heat was different than a lot of things that we had gone through. And it had rained. They had a lot of rain. So it was just a strange change from, there were soccer fields that were underwater, and within 2 days the ground was splitting in cracks that were 4 or 5, 6 inches deep because it got so dry so fast. And just trying to always remember what you're trained to do, follow your leaders, do what you're told, and just keep your bearings. Keeping your bearings is one of the most important things. And when you had some downtime, making sure that the basics always come back into play of the key to survival, as far as taking care of your feet, taking care of your weapon, and then helping anybody else that might. A lot of people have extra duties and things like that, helping people that need help once you get your stuff squared away. And I was the youngest, lowest ranking member of the platoon, so I always felt like I didn't want to be the one that needed the extra help. I always wanted to make sure that I could keep up with everyone else. Some of these guys had far more training than I had that I'd received. So it was intimidating at times trying to keep up.
So, like, did you have any moments where you kind of, okay, well, I'm here to do my job, but then when you actually kind of get into it, did you have any moments where, like, okay, this is it now?
Yeah, definitely had a few of those. And the funny thing about it is when things happen, they happen so quick that it's all reaction from training and doing immediate action drills time and time again, to the point where it's like, this is getting crazy. Like, we were supposed to have an 8-hour training day. Now we've been out here for 10 hours. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? It took one instance to realize why, and why the recon teams and platoons are so much better is because of the amount of extra that they made us do. And after that, you don't really question things anymore. It's this is the way it's going to be, and this is only to make us better as a unit. And being part of the Marine Expeditionary Unit, we would be basically self-sufficient on the battlefield. Everything that was needed was provided through what we brought, and it was an eye-opening experience.
What's like one piece of advice that you picked up while you were in the military?
One of the biggest things was it pays to be a winner, especially during some of the training and the pool. The pool was always definitely one of my hardest parts of training. I thought I knew how to swim until I got to my unit, and I realized the very first day that I was not as strong of a swimmer as I thought. But the saying goes, it pays to be a winner, and it was one of those things where when you finished first, then you got your extra little break in between, and if you didn't finish first, you just kept going and going and going, and no break involved. And once you finished whatever that evolution of training was, it was right into the next phase, and you learned. It was better to put out and just absolutely whatever you think your best is, you can do a little bit better.
Do you have any funny stories from when you were in?
There's a lot of funny stories. Watching people adjust to life in boot camp is funny. I had the opportunity growing up to travel a little bit. I was lucky. And there are some recruits that you could tell they probably never left their small towns from wherever they came from. And all of a sudden you're in California and life is different, much different than what you know. And then, the deployments are always fun. Being stationed in California itself was great. You get a little bit of freedom on the weekends and stuff like that. And, it's one of those things that you get people who have never been away from from their home, and they get to California or wherever you're stationed. I guess it doesn't matter, but staying out of trouble is half the battle, but getting into trouble is some of the fun too. And as long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting other people. And then deployments were always great outside of any combat operations that we were doing. Our port stations that I was able to do Hawaii, Australia, Guam, and numerous other countries. But those were some great times with the guys of just being able to rent a house. And we had met some girls that were Americans studying abroad in Australia, and they hey, we have a big house. You guys are more than welcome to stay with us, so you don't have to spend money on a place. So it was great. We had friendly faces. They were kind of similar. There was one girl from Chicago, so that was nice. We had a lot in common, knew a lot of like the same schools, the same areas. And, of course, Marines are always very clean, and we're always maintaining our uniforms and everything like that. So as a thank you to them, we were always cleaning their house and doing the dishes and things like that for them. And they could appreciate that. Not that they were dirty, but while we were there making a mess of things, we could at least clean up after ourselves. And while we were in Iraq, specifically on my second deployment, it's very stressful. It's always high stress situations, and you learn to deal with it the more you do it, in and out of missions, and the pace of the missions is very fast for us, especially. But some of the downtime that we have, once in a while we'd get a day or two off, and it was get as many meals as you can get as many showers as you can get, and get a haircut, get yourself back into grooming standards, and so on and so forth. And those were some of the fun times. Just there's not much to do. Internet was very intermittent at best. So trying to contact back home almost made things harder in a way. Email was usually the best. Phone calls were hard. And, but we always found some way to stay busy and keep ourselves occupied. And whether it was a team building, we played baseball, throw the football around and stuff like that. And it would help to get your mind off things for a few moments. Yeah. And then give you time to reset.
I remember you talking about you and a couple guys were in a chicken coop, and the lull in the conversation, and somebody said, Do the chickens have large talons?
That was a couple of years after Napoleon Dynamite came out, and on the ship, there's not a whole lot to do at certain times. There's a lot of movies being played and replayed, but so Napoleon Dynamite was one of those movies that either you loved it or you hated it, and it was definitely split down the platoon 50-50, but after you watch something a few times, you find the dumbest parts funnier and funnier. And
Yeah.
we were tasked with clearing out a chicken coop, and not really thinking, we were just following our tactics. Before we went into the chicken coop, we had to clear it with a flashbang. And of course, we just stirred up, I don't know how many feathers and pounds of chicken poo, and everything is in the air, and we're just choked out. And of course, we're just dying laughing because now we're just covered in filth. And as everything starts to calm down, my buddy looks at me and he's just like, do the chickens have large talons?
Do the chickens have large talons? Do they have what?
And it was great. Again, it's like the little things, and laughter in those situations seems to be a very common thing, since I do a lot of reading on the history of different wars, and just it seems like laughter always comes back as one of the best medications for that stress, that break in the action of just, okay, this is as serious as it can get. We're in a very, very potentially deadly situation, but to be able to make light of things and move forward from there, it really helps that mental reset.
So you mentioned having more than one deployment. How long were you in, and like how many deployments did that take up?
So each deployment was 6 months, and that included the time that it took for us to ferry from San Diego to the Middle East and back. So being part of a Force Recon platoon, they would fly us ahead of the fleet. The fleet would leave from San Diego and go to Hawaii. We would fly ahead about 2 weeks ahead and get our last training in as far as parachuting, diving, and try to do as much shooting and some explosive work that we could, because all of that comes with extra pay, and you have to be you have to qualify for that every like 6 months or whatever. After 6 months, if you don't qualify with a jump or a dive, you'll lose your pay. So they were trying to make sure that we would maintain that, because typically there was no dive missions while we were in the Middle East. And to my knowledge, I think there was one parachute operation that 1st Recon Battalion did, which was awesome. We weren't a part of that though. But my job, my MOS, was a parachute rigger. So that was pretty incredible to see, what really started, back from World War II, to see it still being a part of the capability of the military and being practical. It was nice to be, loosely involved in that.
Yeah. What feelings did you have before you left the Marines, like knowing that you're going to get out, and then after you left? Like what was going through your head with those?
After active duty?
Yeah. Like, and after you, like your term was done and you were no longer in the military.
One of the biggest things I can remember was the media and what the ideas or what they were reporting about things going on after seeing firsthand what was going on. They didn't really talk a whole lot about the humanitarian missions that we were a part of, as far as supporting these villages, the villagers, these farmers, the children, with schools, school supplies, food and water, medical help, dental help, vaccinations, things like that. Just like the medical care that we were able to provide that they would never have received otherwise. that was something that the media never really touched on. Everything was always, how many people had been killed or lost their lives. That was very frustrating to me. And it took a little while for me to, it's funny, going into the Marine Corps, I was a very amped up kind of, 19-year-old full of piss and vinegar. And after a few years, it actually calmed me down a lot because I realized one of the most important things was I was not as tough as I thought I was.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many more warriors on our side that I had learned so much from that really put me in my position of a perspective of really who I am and what I am as a person, as an American, and as a Marine. And trying to implement those lessons from those men and carrying that with me, even still to this day. Those are lessons that I think about every day. No matter what challenges I face, it's, as a father, as a husband, as an employee, as someone people look up to, it's all, you got to kind of take it all with a grain of salt. And at the same time, you really have to embrace it, because unless you were there, unless you were a part of it, people just don't know. And trying to explain it is very hard. It's very hard. Unless you were there, you can't really fully comprehend it.
Mm-hmm. So my closing one will be, for somebody who wants to go in, what would you recommend? What would your advice be?
My recommendations would first be to make sure that you're doing everything you can to physically get yourself ready. It'll give you such a huge advantage. And other than that is to, be prepared for some of the hardest and some of the worst days of your life. And it's complemented with some of the best friendships and some of the best days of your life that you'll ever have. Moments that you'll never forget, stuff you wish you could forget. But all in all, for me personally, I feel very blessed and very lucky. First off, that I made it out. I made it home with everyone that I ever deployed with. And, I try to encompass all and implement that into my daily life, just to be appreciative of what I have now and know that I'm blessed.
Mm-hmm.
And try not to complain about the little things, because there's so many people in the world that have it far worse than Americans do in general. And, the resilience that the Marine Corps or the military can teach you is something that is very special. And it takes a lot of sacrifice to acquire that. So I'll never allow myself to lose that resiliency.
Something that we've talked about many times on this show before is just, what reason do we have for complaining about the stuff that we do?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. We have we're very well provided for. And it's easy to forget. It's easy to lose focus and lose your perspective on things. But ultimately, hardships come and go. And when the hard times hit is when you realize how easy things really were before that. Mm-hmm. Especially with the loss of a loved one, family member, and a friend, and so on and so forth. It's an easy thing to lose sight of, but we try to just keep things in perspective and realize that we are very lucky to be alive at this point in time and be American.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank you for coming on the show.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me. Appreciate everybody. That was awesome, man.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, it's awesome.